Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Work, and as the Chief Executive Officer of a Center for a New American Security, it's my honor and privilege to welcome you here tonight for the book launch of Robert D. Kaplan's newest book, Asia's Cauldron, The South China Sea and the End of a Stable Pacific. Before going on, I just ask everybody, if you have any electronic devices, if you could please check them and make sure that they are silenced. I would appreciate it, since we don't want them to disturb the goings-on for the rest of the evening. Now, as this great crowd suggests, Bob Kaplan is one of today's most recognized and respected American journalists. He is currently a national correspondent for the Atlantic magazine and writer for Stratfor. He also is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and I am very happy to say, an adjunct senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security. I think Bob first kind of hit the national security policy scene in a big way with his publication, The Coming Anarchy, in the Atlantic Monthly in 1994. In fact, I was talking to him just before the event kicked off, and yesterday he spoke to the leadership of the Department of Defense, and they asked him to update that very seminal article. Now, that article has been widely cited and debated and was the first of his many articles that highlighted the reemergence of both cultural and historical tensions and geographical tensions that were suspended during the Cold War. He has since authored numerous books, among them Monsoon, Imperial Grunts, Hog Pilots and Blue Water Grunts, and my personal favorite, The Revenge of Geography. He is also a prolific commentator whose work has been featured in numerous publications, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Republic, the National Interest, Foreign Affairs, and the Wall Street Journal. Now, Bob's work is always very well written, insightful, and provocative. It's extremely well known and respected inside national security and policy circles. He has been a consultant for the U.S. Army Special Operations Forces, the United States Marine Corps, and the U.S. Air Force. He has briefed presidents. He's lectured at military war colleges, at the FBI, the National Security Agency, the Pentagon's Joint Staff, and the CIA. He's also lectured at universities and business forums. He's appeared on PBS, NPR, C-SPAN, and Fox. From 2006 to 2008, Bob was a visiting professor at the United States Naval Academy, where he taught a course entitled Future Global Security Challenges. And in 2009, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates appointed him to the Defense Policy Board, which is a federal advisory committee to the United States Department of Defense, and he served on that body for 2 years. His thoughtful writings have garnered him an awful lot of praise. In 2001, he was a recipient of the Greenway Winship Award for Excellence in International Reporting. In 2002, he was awarded the United States State Department Distinguished Public Service Award. New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman called Kaplan one of the most widely read authors defining the post-Cold War era, along with Francis Fukuyama, Harvard professor Samuel P. Huntington, and Yale professor Paul Kennedy. Rare company indeed. And perhaps this explains why in 2011, Foreign Policy magazine named Kaplan as one of the world's top global 100 thinkers. So I think we could fill a room like this any night just by asking Bob, hey, do you want to come and kind of tell us what you're thinking? But tonight we're especially privileged to hear him talk and to give his thoughts on his newest book, Asia's Cauldron, The South China Sea and the End of the Stable Pacific. This book is extremely timely, turning its gaze to the developments in the far western Pacific. And as one review put it, with oil reserves of several billion barrels, an estimated 900 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and several centuries worth of competing territorial claims, the South China Sea in particular is a simmering pot of potential conflict. Part travelogue, part geopolitical primer, Asia's Cauldron offers up a vivid snapshot of the nations surrounding the South China Sea, the conflicts brewing in the region at the dawn of the 21st century, and their implications for global peace and security. Now, to help tease out some of Bob's thoughts this evening, we're especially lucky to have Steve Inskeep, who's here with us tonight. He's one of the current hosts of the Morning Edition on National Public Radio. He, along with his co-host, Renee Montigny, took over Morning Edition in December 2004, and he has been on that job ever since. Prior to being a host on the Morning Edition, Steve was NPR's transportation correspondent and the host of Weekend All Things Considered. And since joining the Morning Edition in 2004, he has hosted the program from New Orleans, Detroit, Karachi, Cairo, and Tehran, establishing himself as a thoughtful commentator on a wide variety of issues. He investigated Iraqi police in Baghdad and is the author of The Instant City, Life and Death in Karachi, which was published in 2011 by Penguin Press. He has also written for many publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Steve's work has also garnered praise. In 2006, he received the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award for The Price of African Oil, a series on conflict in Nigeria. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bob and Steve for our event tonight.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. You were actually right when you said you could fill a room just by saying, let's find out what this man is thinking. Someone sent me an email and said, Robert Kaplan has got a book or something. You want to come talk? And I said, sure. I'm happy to do that. It's great to be here. It's an honor to talk with you. And congratulations on the book. I found it really compelling. And I want to begin, because we're talking about a geographic space, and it's hard for us to keep that in our heads, to give us a mental map, if you will. When you talk about the Cauldron, the South China Sea, will you define the edges of that cauldron for us? What are we talking about here?
The South China Sea, think of it as the Mittel Europa of the 21st century. Just like Central and Eastern Europe were the center of geopolitical conflict in the 20th century, think of the South China Sea as that for the 21st century. It is surrounded by the countries of Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Vietnam, the Strait of Malacca in the southwest. Taiwan is in the north, which is the cork in the bottle, so to speak, for the South China Sea. It's about the size of the greater Caribbean. And in fact, just as the Caribbean is called the American Mediterranean, I call the South China Sea the Asian Mediterranean in terms of its centrality to Asia. The South China Sea is the antechamber to the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is the world's global energy interstate. All the oil and natural gas from the Middle East comes by supertanker across the Indian Ocean, comes through the straits of Malacca, Sunduk, and Banda, and other straits, and comes up through the South China Sea en route to the burgeoning middle-class fleshpots of Japan, South Korea, and the emerging middle classes of coastal China. And it's not just oil tankers. The South China Sea handles much of the commercial traffic in the world, because if the world has an economic geographical organizing principle, it's Asia. It's the Asia Pacific, with two of the three world's largest economies, China and Japan. And China and Japan and South Korea get all of their goods, energy, cargo, up from the South China Sea. So the South China Sea is really the heart of things. Think of it as Asia's Persian Gulf in another way. But whereas the Persian Gulf is only important for oil, for energy, the South China Sea is important for energy transport, for the oil and natural gas under the seabed, and also for all the commercial dry good cargo traffic that travels through it.
You've already said a couple of provocative things I want to follow up on. First, you compared the South China Sea to Central Europe in the 20th century. I'll just note the obvious. Disputes over borders and nationalism in Central Europe in the 20th century led to the two most catastrophic wars in the history of civilization. Are you worried about what happens as nations conflict over control of the South China Sea?
I think the South China Sea, along with the East China Sea, where China and Japan have several conflicts, will not lead to a World War I style cataclysm. World War I was about modernism. It was about tanks, trenches, things like that. And it went on for 4 years and killed 17 million soldiers and civilians. The East Asia, the South China Sea, is the demonic demons of postmodernism in the sense of warships, nuclear submarines, fifth generation